This will be for the con exercise, solve sinusoidal equations. So just some notes before we start. There's two identities you need to know. Okay, this is the Greek letter theta representing the angle measurement. And remember that sine of an angle theta equals sine of the angle pi minus theta. Okay, I used pi because these problems are going to be in radians. If they were in degrees, this would just be 180. And also the cosine of an angle theta equals the cosine of negative theta. So you just change the sign on the angle. And the formula for the period, it's going to equal 2 pi divided by k, where k is the coefficient of the angle. Okay, you'll see, if you remember, the coefficient is the number in front of the variable, and of course the angle will always follow the sine or cosine function. Okay, it says select one or more expressions that together represent all solutions to the equation, and your answer should be in radians, n is any integer. So here's the equation. We're basically solving for x, and it says choose all answers that apply, so there's possibly more than one correct answer here. Alright, so here we're basically solving for x, and we have x as part of the angle. So let's see. Since we have a minus 3 here, I'm just going to do plus 3 on both sides. Okay, 3 minus 3 cancels, and 3 plus 2 is just going to be a 5. Alright, and I want to isolate the sine function here, so I want to get rid of 14. This is 14 times sine, so the opposite of times is divided by. So I'm going to divide both sides by 14, and on the left hand side 14 over 14 cancels. In order to isolate this angle, the opposite of sine is the inverse sine. So we need to apply the inverse sine to both sides of this equation. Alright, you always want to do the same thing to both sides. So the inverse sine and the sine cancel each other out, and we're left with the angle 20x. And on the right hand side we have the inverse sine of 5 over 14. Now, if you recall in the beginning, we said that the sine of an angle theta is equivalent to the sine of an angle pi minus theta. Okay, so the angle is just subtracted from pi. Okay, so 20x was the angle, and over on this side we're just going to do pi minus that angle. So it's going to be pi minus 20x. And since they're equal, it's going to equal the same thing, the inverse sine of 5 over 14. Okay, so on the left hand side we're going to divide both sides by 20. In fact, let me get the number on the calculator first before I do that. So I'll do inverse sine of 5 divided by 14 on the calculator. Make sure it's set to radians. Okay, on the calculator I get 0.365, and solving for x we need to divide both sides by 20 over here. I'll do this on the calculator. Alright, and I get 0.018. On this equation here, solving for x, we need to subtract pi from both sides. And it cancels here. And solving for x, we divide both sides by -20. And I'm going to do this on the calculator using the pi key and make sure it's set to radians. And I get x equals 0.139. Now there's one final step for these two solutions. You have to remember that the solution repeats every time the period comes around. We said at the beginning the formula for the period is going to be 2 pi divided by k. And we said k was the coefficient of the angle, so that's the number multiplied by the variable. We can see right here that k is 20. So this is going to be 2 pi over 20. And of course 20 divided by 2 is just 10. So the period is going to be pi over 10. So these two answers actually repeat every multiple of pi over 10. So we can say plus or minus pi over 10 times n. All right, and n is just going to be the number 1, 2, 3, because the answer repeats every multiple of pi over 10. So you do this same thing on the other solution. Plus or minus pi over 10 times n. So we want to look for the answer with 0.018 and 0.139 and have the correct period as well. Pi over 10 times n. Let's take a look. Okay, answer A is incorrect. Answer B matches what we had. Answer C matches what we had. Has the correct answer and the correct period. This is wrong, and this is wrong. Okay, so that's basically it. And I wrote plus or minus the period, but they wrote plus because basically they're saying n could also be -1, -2. So you basically add or subtract any multiple of pi over 10. Alright, so here we have one with the cosine function, and it says your answer should be in radians. And again, we're going to choose all answers that apply. It might be more than one answer. So we want to solve for x. Okay, the first step, since we have plus 2 here, I'm going to do -2 on both sides. 2 minus 2 cancels. And of course, 10 minus 2 is just +8. All right, and here we have 18 times cosine. The opposite of times is divided by. So we're going to divide both sides by 18. And 18 over 18 cancels. So we're looking to isolate the angle in order to solve for x. So to get rid of cosine, we're going to do inverse cosine of this whole thing. And of course, inverse cosine on the other side as well. You want to do the same thing to both sides. So inverse cosine and cosine cancel. And we're left with the angle 10x. And that equals the inverse cosine of 8 over 18. Okay, you can reduce the fraction if you want, but you don't have to. The calculator will know it's the same thing. Now, at the beginning, we said that you need to use the identity cosine of an angle theta equals the cosine of negative theta. Okay, so you just change the sign, the plus minus sign on the angle, and it's the equivalent, it's the same thing. So 10x was our angle right here, and we just changed the sign on the 10x. So here we're going to have negative 10x and it equals the same thing. So it's again going to be inverse cosine of 8 over 18. Okay, you can do this first, but solving for x, we're going to have to divide both sides by 10. And on this side, divide both sides by negative 10. And I'm going to do this on the calculator. Make sure it's set to radians. And I get x equals 1.11. Okay, since we're dividing by negative 10 over here, it's going to be the same thing except the negative. So it's going to be negative 1.11. And the final step is to find the period. We said the formula for the period is just 2 pi divided by k. And we said k is the coefficient of the angle, so that's the number multiplied by the variable right there. It's just a 10. So it's going to be 2 pi divided by 10. And reducing that fraction, 10 divided by 2 is just 5. And this is just pi, or 1 pi. So that is our period. So these answers are going to repeat every multiple of pi over 5. So I'm going to do plus or minus pi over 5 times n. And n can be any integer, negative 1, negative 2, positive 1, positive 2. The same thing on this side. Plus or minus pi over 5 times n. So we're going to go to our choices and look for these two answers and make sure we have the correct period as well, pi over 5 times n. Okay, I made one small mistake. I forgot to divide by 10. I said 1.11. I meant to say it's 0.11 and also negative 0.11, but the period was correct. So answer A, correct answer, correct period, that one is okay. Answer B, the period is wrong. Answer C, correct answer, correct period, that one is good. D, it's not D, this is the correct period, but this answer is wrong, and this answer is wrong as well. So it's just A and C.